Member from Nelson Creston.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise today to speak to this motion, as I'm the member who put it forward. And just so that the viewers at home know what motion we're speaking to, it is be it resolved that this House acknowledge the work being done in other jurisdictions to reduce poverty. And the reason I brought forward this motion, Honourable Speaker, is because there is a tremendous amount of work being done in other provinces that, frankly, as I look here back home in British Columbia, is not being done here. And I think that other jurisdictions around this country are showing us the success of what they are doing. They are developing best practices, and we have a lot to learn from. And they're the very things that we should be implementing here. One of the things that you see across the province in all but 2 provinces, here in BC and Saskatchewan, is a poverty reduction plan. And what we see as other provinces develop these poverty reduction plans, we see forward movement in actively and significantly, meaningfully reducing poverty, lifting people out of poverty, putting food on their tables, being able to pay their bills, having good housing, children going to childcare, accessing the supports that they need so they can learn in the classroom and move on through the K-12 system with success, enter post-secondary education, get the skills training and the post-secondary education that they need so they can get the jobs that are required today and in the future, and themselves have a good life. And at the end of the day, when we talk about reducing poverty, that's exactly what we're speaking to, Honourable Speaker, is the idea that every single citizen in our society deserves to have a good life. They do not deserve to live in poverty. No one does, Honourable Speaker. And if we work from that premise, we will see the good stories that are coming out of our other jurisdictions and look on how we can implement them here rather than ignore the problem, which is of course what the government has been doing, and provide piecemeal solutions that don't actually look at the broader picture. So specifically, Honourable Speaker, as I mentioned, there's a poverty reduction plan in all provinces, but here in Saskatchewan, and here's what we're learning from poverty reduction plans. Quebec was quite a leader. They are on their 2nd poverty reduction plan, started in 2010, and they've learned a lot from that. They've learned how to engage the citizenry, and they've made great strides in reducing poverty. And one of the things that they did was they increased income assistance rates. They looked at childcare and provided affordable childcare throughout the province and made sure that there was educational supports for children, as well as employment program supports. So unlike British Columbia, where we've cut those employment program supports significantly, by 46% just this year alone from last year's budget, they have actually implemented better employment programs to help people get good paying jobs. One of the things that is being done in Manitoba right now as part of their poverty reduction program, Honourable Speaker, is that they recently announced a new shelter benefit program to support low-income people in private housing. And so what this is the Manitoba Rent Assist program will be available to both income assistance recipients and other low-income Manitobans, and it will replace the current income assistance, shelter allowance, and rent aid programs. And what this plan will basically do is increase housing rates to 75% of the median market rent. Here in British Columbia, we know that the rental support for people in income assistance is $375 is the basic. If you are a single mom with 1 child, it's $570. The maximum that you could possibly get, if you're a single parent with 6 kids, you could get $820. The lowest rent available on average in this province is $436 in Williams Lake. The average rent for a bachelor suite in BC is $1,069, Honourable Speaker. So I dare say that this province is way off, and Manitoba has found a solution for dealing with housing crisis that people are experiencing there. Another thing that we could be looking at here that other provinces are doing is the discontinuation of clawing back child support from income assistance parents receiving income assistance, the discontinuation of clawing back that child support dollar for dollar. In Quebec,
they allow for a $100 exemption. In Ontario, right now, they are researching the possibility of allowing for 50% of child support to be retained by parents. That's something that we could be doing here. We have to stop taking money out of the hands of BC's kids, Honourable Speaker, because it's wrong. And I look forward to hearing what other members have to say on those very issues.
Thank the member. Recognize the member from Maple Ridge Mission.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just in response to the remarks from the member from Nelson Creston, I will say that British Columbia has seen a reduction of child poverty by about 43% over the past decade or so. And right now we have one of the lowest levels, the lowest level of child poverty in decades, probably I believe it's about 30 years. So we've come a long ways. There's certainly a lot more to do, but we're on the right track. And as MLAs, we all meet people in our offices, in our constituencies, with people that struggle with poverty and the challenges of making ends meet. And it's especially troubling when children are involved. And our hearts go out to them. And I know that as MLAs, we do all that we can to connect people with supports and resources. And I must say that this is one of the most rewarding aspects of being an MLA and with my constituency staff is being able to see real direct improvements and help with people that are facing real problems. In preparation for my remarks, the first question that came to my mind was, what is poverty? Many years ago, I spent some time in a Central American country, in a couple of jungle villages, assisting with church organizations. And it was a real revelation of human nature. In one village, I slept in a hammock. There was occasional chicken and piglet running around the house. Children were barefoot. There was school in the community, but they had a challenge paying for pencils. And, but you know, one thing I'd noticed, well, a few things. One is what I had, just my sofas in my home. My wife and I were recently married, and you know, we had very modest means. But I saw that, and we had more just with the sofas than they had in their entire household. But I noticed that people in these villages were just as happy as people in North America. And it really made me realize just the adage that happiness does not consist of the abundance of things. Not that things are bad, and we certainly want people's material comfort to increase, but life is more than that. In another village, I stayed with a family, and this family had one light bulb and one fan. And I noticed that there were some people in the community that were actually jealous from the luxuries that these people had. And I would say most people in North America and Canada and British Columbia have more than a fan and a light bulb. And I just saw that really wealth and poverty can often be a matter of comparison. And I looked up definition of poverty in Wikipedia, of all sources. And I'll read the definition. Poverty is a general scarcity of dearth, or the state of lacking certain material possessions of money. Absolute poverty or destitution refers to deprivation of basic human needs, which commonly includes food, water, sanitation, clothing, shelter, healthcare, and education. Relative poverty is defined contextually as economic inequality in the location or society in which people live. And so just want to speak about absolute poverty or destitution, and that is universal. It doesn't matter where people live. And there are certain elements that are necessary for survival. And one would be, might seem silly, but it is safe drinking water. And that's one of the biggest advancements in third world or in first world nations is the improvements in drinking water. We have seen there are millions of people, children that die every single year because of poor drinking water, dying of cholera, typhoid, malaria, diarrhea. So this is something that we all benefit because we're in a wealthy nation. There are more children that have died in the past couple of decades than died because of poor water conditions than died from the Second World War. Also, clothing. You know, that's a need. I know in Maple Ridge that there are about half a dozen thrift stores that provide low or no cost clothing for the needy. So that it is available. Shelter. I don't see children, I haven't seen children as I've seen in other places living on the streets. There may be some, but it's a rare occurrence, and normally there is intervention. Food. I have not met children starving in British Columbia in the past 50-some years, and if they were, then I think that would be normally willful or criminal negligence. Healthcare. It's available to 1 million free for about 800,000 people that paid no health care premiums, and 1 million British Columbians are subsidized.
This is something.
And basic dental coverage, education is covered. There are many different things, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member. Member from Victoria Beacon Hill.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. And I find the last speaker unbelievable when it comes to knowing about the reality of poverty in British Columbia. I would like the honourable member who just spoke to come and speak to the mother who is living in a car with her children in my community to tell them that there isn't poverty in British Columbia. There is huge poverty in British Columbia, and this government has ignored it, and it's long past time to deal with it, Honourable Speaker. The member talked about the basics. Well, we are talking about the basics here, Honourable Speaker. We're talking about 153,000 children living in poverty. And children don't live alone in poverty. Those are families living in poverty. And what has been this government's response, Honourable Speaker? It's been regional poverty plans that the Minister for Children and Families acknowledged have only served 72 families total over the last couple of years. Now, I'm grateful that the government's doing anything to serve families, but I have to tell you, Honourable Speaker, the minister could not tell me whether those families were out of poverty. They had done no tracking. They had not expanded the program. They had not put in place what is needed in this province, which is to address one of the fundamental crisis areas facing British Columbia, and that's the area of inequality. I believe, Honourable Speaker, that governments pay attention to things they measure, that they set as priorities, that they put in place to be looked at across government, and this government has done nothing to put in place a province-wide poverty reduction plan. I'm sure we'll hear the members opposite talk about a disagreement of statistics. Well, if we had in place a province-wide poverty reduction plan, let's sit down and agree on the statistics to use. Let's end this ridiculous argument that takes away from focusing on children in poverty and actually agree on the statistics. We could also then, Honourable Speaker, put in place a plan that would include all of the ministries that impact poverty in our province: education, health, housing, social development, Ministry for Children and Families. We could actually include all of those ministries in putting together a comprehensive plan. And Honourable Speaker, no one is naive enough to believe that we are going to solve child poverty overnight. It's complex. It requires work across ministries. But for some reason, this government seems to think that that's a reason not to do anything. Well, that's not a reason to do anything, Honourable Speaker. We must address this crisis in British Columbia. We have to do it because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's the right economic thing to do. We don't need another study, Honourable Speaker, to tell us that children living in poverty cost our system when it comes to health care. Their health outcomes are not as good. They face challenges later in life. So it's not only the right thing to do, it's the right economic thing to address the issue of poverty in British Columbia. But again, we see no measurements, we see no attention, we see no focus, and we certainly don't see it as a priority in British Columbia. We have the worst income gap of any province in Canada. The Canadian Medical Association lists poverty as one of the leading factors determining health in our country. A leading factor, and again, the government is doing nothing to address this. There's a connection as well, Honourable Speaker, between physical and mental health. And physical health deteriorates with poverty, therefore there are challenges when it comes to mental health. And so we could get started with a province-wide plan. As I said, we could agree on the measurements. We could agree on first steps to start. The clawback of child family maintenance could be the first place to begin. where we say when parents are contributing towards a child and raising that child, that that family should be eligible to keep those resources. Because that's what those dollars are meant for. They're meant for the children, Honourable Speaker. And so to the members opposite who say that we're not dealing with poverty, I would challenge them. I would challenge them to go and meet with families who are living in substandard housing, families who do have to make choices between food and recreation, who do have to send their children to school without the fees that they need for many of the activities that every other child is taking part in. Parents who are making the choices that they aren't going to look after their own health and their own needs. It's basic care like dental care that children are going without because we don't have a poverty reduction plan in place. So, Honourable Speaker, I challenge the government again. If anything should be nonpartisan in this place, it's putting in place a province-wide poverty reduction plan and addressing the crisis that we see in British Columbia. I challenge the members to take the plan that's in place. I challenge the members to agree on it, and I challenge the members to address child poverty today. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Thank the member and recognize the member from West Vancouver, Capilano.
Four years ago, I completed a rather large statistical study of the community profiles associated with having a high proportion of low-income families with children, or as we commonly describe it, childhood poverty. I was motivated by the advocacy group First Call releasing a report with the startling news that my own constituency of West Vancouver had one of the highest childhood poverty rates in all of British Columbia, right up there with Richmond. I ran the numbers for these 54 British Columbia communities and was further surprised to find that with only two descriptors, the percentage of single moms and the percentage of immigrants in any community, one could predict almost 2/3 of the proportion of low-income families with children. Statistics Canada does not use the word poverty. They refer to low income. By their definition, in 2012, low income for a family of four living in Vancouver was any household earning less than $43,942. Let's say $44,000. Outside of Vancouver, the number is $36,600. Certainly, a family of four in Vancouver trying to make ends meet on a family income of $44,000 is a big challenge. Whether it means living in poverty is in the eye of the beholder. I salute First Call, which regularly issues these press releases on childhood poverty, for convincing all of us to adopt their terminology, that these are indeed poverty line cutoffs. The good news is that Statistics Canada points out that 1/3 of the persons they categorize as low income move out of that category each year, while 3% of all Canadians who are not low income move into that category each year. So there's considerable circulation of people in and out. The bad news is that a percentage of the population, relatively small in Statistics Canada's view, experiences persistent low income, including lone mothers, immigrants, members of visible minorities, people with less education, and people with activity limitations. Clearly, it is upon these groups that we should focus our social efforts. The motion we are debating today suggests we learn from others. Being of Swedish extraction and having lived in Sweden from time to time, I'm aware that the general social condition for all levels of Swedish society is quite good. That is not, however, attributable in the main to a distributive tax policy. It is attributable, in my personal observation, to the fact that the Scandinavian countries seem to have a more highly developed sense that we are all in this together and we should help one another, and they do. In contrast, I spent a full decade of my life training MBAs at the Harvard Business School, otherwise known as the West Point of capitalism. I've concluded that bloody tooth and fang capitalism is not, in fact, going to automatically solve our low-income problem through some trickle-down mechanism. So this debate today is worthwhile. We really are our brother's keepers, and we should work harder at it. Thank you.
Thank the member. Recognize the member from Burnaby Lougheed.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I can't agree more with my colleague, member from Nelson Creston, to have this House acknowledge the work being done in other jurisdictions to reduce poverty. So it is my pleasure to support our motion this morning on behalf of Burnaby Lougheed. As we are very well aware, there is a string of sobering facts straight off of Statistics Canada that are echoed by a broad spectrum of stakeholders, as well as the subject matter experts alike. And we've all heard it. Worst rate of overall poverty in Canada for 13 years straight, worst rate of child poverty, worst income gap, worst rate of child vulnerability, worst record of job creation, worst affordability, worst student debt levels. And that's worst as in dead last in this entire country. And not surprisingly, as it turns out, since we are apparently one of the only 2 provinces in the country without any plans for poverty reduction. And what I mean by that is no, a regional poverty reduction pilot plan with only 100 families or less wouldn't qualify as a plan for the 500,000 British Columbians living in poverty in this province, even if this abandoned pilot was to have continued. Now, what's more disturbing is that BC has seen an increase in poverty rate every year when across Canada poverty rates have been decreasing. But of course, it's easy to tune out and look the other way when, as governors, such unflattering and inconvenient facts of our own performance are repeatedly reminded. So instead of continuing to quote the numbers and trends that we are all aware of, as real as they are, let's draw faces. Faces to describe poverty. What does it even look like? Is it a well-deserved consequence for the so-called lazy in our society? Is it the addicts homeless on our streets? And I would say that that's hardly the case. Poverty looks like a young family of 3, with the father working full-time at a minimum wage job without any benefits that are struggling to gross $22,000 a year while going to night school to better his odds, and the mother finding part-time gig for a few extra grand here and there while raising the child. Even so, they would together bring barely $2,000 a month home after 13% of income tax, which is ironic in a country that lets the biggest corporations pay as little as 1.25% for tax. So from that $2,000, let's take away 2-zone monthly transit pass for $124, or likely yet $170 for 3-zone as the housing costs drive people further and further away from the city. Dock off another $102 for MSP, and that's including, that's after applying the subsidy. And it'll be, of course, many cold winter months now to keep gas and hydro bills for less than $80 with the rate hike, minus $1,000 for a basement suite, shave off another $100 for property insurance and phone bills. And you're expecting this family, what's left of it is essentially $20 a day. $20 a day for food, clothing, schooling, and all the life's incidentals. So it turns out 1/3 of our poorest children in BC have parents that are employed and working full-time year-round. These are the people in our society that I think are just as hardworking and capable as many of us that are in this House, but without the kind of parents and relatives, their job benefits, insurance, savings plans, other resources and privileges in life that we have, and we often take credit for ourselves. So I represent many of these families in Burnaby Lougheed, a good portion of them from the immigrant community, and my family is one of them. My family, my parents are hardworking, intelligent people who came to this country, and it didn't matter how desperately they tried. We never had a family dinner together, but if it wasn't for access to quality education that was affordable with the student loans that were available, and if it wasn't for the different social services and programs that were available for me and my brother, my parents wouldn't have the kind of life that they have today, and nobody in this House can look at them in the eyes and say that you don't deserve a better shot in life. And so my family and I am a product of everything that was available in this country, that was available in this province, that I'm seeing for myself now is getting worse and worse year after year after year. So what was available for my family is what I would like all of us to fight for, to make sure that they continue on for the families that we have in BC and for the generations to come. Now, one of the things that I want to highlight is for the special circumstances that our immigrant community faces, who are disproportionately affected by poverty and are 3 times more likely to be poor than Canadian-born persons. So the census shows that compared with 9.7% of Canadian-born persons falling below the poverty line, a disturbing 34%, that's 3 times as much, of recent immigrants live in poverty. Immigrants arriving in Canada, as we know, face many challenges, and these challenges compound their ability to look for housing and employment. And I'll just wrap it up at that, but I again thank the member from Nelson Crescent for her motion. Thank you.
Thank the member. Recognize the member from Surrey Panorama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I look at the resolution and I find the resolution interesting one because as we're looking at the concept of poverty, it says is to look at the work that is being done in other jurisdictions. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, I've had the exceptional opportunity of being able to sit on the Executive Council of 2 world bodies dealing with local government, and part of the process that they're working with is certainly dealing with poverty reduction in each one of their different countries. It comes under different names. For example, with the United Cities and Local Government, which is the world body for local government, poverty reduction comes under the banner of aid effectiveness and decentralization, where the concept is how do we effectively take those dollars that are coming into those countries and effectively use those dollars to reduce poverty. As Canada and the Netherlands have been major sponsors of this and actually done a lot of the work on it because of the examples that we have here in Canada and also within the Netherlands. Same thing within the Commonwealth Local Government Forum. But the focus of poverty reduction in each one of these organizations and throughout the world is focused on local economic development. In other words, creating jobs. And I give the simple example of dealing with Mali. Where Mali, for those of you that aren't familiar with Mali, that's where Timbuktu is, and we're used to talking about Timbuktu as being way out in the middle of nowhere. Well, it's in the Sahara Desert, and Mali is the country. The unemployment rate there is 30% because 50% of the population in Mali receives under $1.25 a day in income. And that's the international definition of poverty, is under $1.25 a day. Mali is about in the 260s of the 283 countries for their economy, so obviously they have massive challenges there. And what is the world doing in Mali to help them with poverty reduction and working with them? Well, actually, one of the mayors, the mayor of a suburb just outside of Bamako, which is the capital city, wanted to so desperately take me out to show her community because she was so proud of how Canadians had helped her community. And in fact, as I got there, she took me where? She took me to the garbage dump, of all places. The garbage dump is where she took me, and along comes this cart being pulled by a donkey, and she had a massive smile on her face because this was garbage collection. Now, instead of the garbage going into the local rivers and the lakes, creating pollution and disease, they were now taking them centralization, they were separating the organics out, which was being used to feed cows and the goats. They had separated the plastics, the metals, because this was all producing local employment, local jobs for those people, so they were in fact making use of the resources that were coming into their country and stretching them out. We're working with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is working with 10 municipalities there and also 12 in Burkina Faso. They both speak French, working together to create local development, create local jobs within their community. We have the Capital Regional District right here where this house resides, is working in Tanzania. Prince George is working in Vietnam. We find many different municipalities all across Canada and lots of them in British Columbia, the Columbia-Shuswap Regional District, Golden, Township of Langley, North Vancouver, Pemberton, all working with other nations that are in abject poverty, and the focus of every one of those is on creating jobs, working with jobs. We find in Puerto Rico, where resource extraction is a major source of employment, what are they doing there? They're looking to Canada for lessons learned from Canada, in fact, in how that we are creating local jobs by skills training, exactly what we see going on in the north of BC with First Nations, where opportunities are coming in for resource extraction, but they're using those opportunities to develop skill training, to develop jobs, to create future sustainability through employment. We see the same thing in Ukraine, where they're working into a free market economy. The focus, local LED, local economic development. And where we look at Greece, we look at Spain, they have tried to reduce poverty by debt and taking the resources of debt, but they still have unemployment of 26 and 28% because they're not creating the jobs, the sustainable jobs for people. And Mr. Chair, that's what we're doing, or Mr. Speaker, that's what we're doing here in the province of British Columbia. We are in fact working on a job reduction strategy, and it's called the BC Jobs Plan, because what we are doing is we are creating jobs for our people. And our focus is, if we create those sustainable jobs in the province, we will, as we see in other jurisdictions around the world. That is the greatest way of reducing poverty. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank the member and recognize the member for Stikeen.
Oh, thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I'm pleased to take my place, and rather than like a couple of members on the other side who are depicting how happy people are in poverty in places like Africa, I'm going to talk about poverty reduction here in BC and in Canada. Other jurisdictions have had a poverty reduction strategy in place, and that is why I'm very pleased to stand and talk in support of the motion from my colleague from Nelson Creston. Be it resolved that this House acknowledge the work being done in other jurisdictions to reduce poverty. Quebec has had a poverty reduction plan since 2002, 12 years. Newfoundland and Labrador since 2006, 8 years. Ontario, Nova Scotia, Manitoba. In fact, BC is only one of 2 provinces without a poverty reduction plan. And why is this important? Well, it's important because we have to look at the indicators in this province. We have the worst income gap of any province in Canada. That is the difference between how well people are doing and how not so well people are doing, the worst gap. We have the worst rate of overall poverty in Canada for 13 years straight. We have the worst rate of child poverty in Canada for 9 of the last 10 years. And we are last place in job creation. So that's why it's important to look at what's going on in other jurisdictions, and there's lessons to be learned. In Quebec, for instance, they now have the least number of people living in poverty in Canada, and they've introduced an earned income exemption for child support payments so that people can go out and earn a little bit of extra cash and not have it come off their child support payments. We also look at other jurisdictions and other provinces. They've seen an increase in families headed by lone mothers, an increase in median incomes in in 2010 and 2011. These are provinces with poverty reduction plans. In BC, what have we seen? We've seen the median income for female lone parent families drop from $32,000 a year in 2010 to $21,500 in 2011. So that is why we need a poverty reduction comprehensive strategy in this province. First Nations are a especially marginalized population, and if you look at the socioeconomic indicators and the social determinants of health, we have a lot to be ashamed of in this province, Honourable Speaker, with regards to the First Nations population. Where I live, and these statistics are not abnormal for the rest of the province, people of First Nations descent are 4 times as likely to die of medically treatable diseases as those in the rest of the population. 32% of housing is substandard and in major need of repair. That's 4 times the provincial rate. Graduation rate from secondary school is about half the provincial average. And there's a life expectancy gap of 6 years between First Nations and non-Aboriginals in this province. And those are numbers for Stikeen. They're also numbers that reflect what's going on in the rest of the province. So it's important to work on a poverty reduction strategy with targets, timelines, a coordinated set of policies that's comprehensive and long-term. But in the meantime, Honourable Speaker, it's incumbent upon us to not pursue policies that will make things worse. And an example I can provide is changes proposed to the Agricultural Land Commission and Agricultural Land Reserve that increase the risk of higher grocery prices by reducing our capacity to grow our own food in BC and it also expands our dependency on imported foods. Groceries, food, this is an area that people can at least afford to cut back on in this province, Honourable Speaker. I think instead what we could do is support the BC Local Food Act that the official opposition has introduced. It's a comprehensive strategy on purchasing locally grown food. It's got a legislative plan to increase local food production, marketing, and processing. So those are some of the things we can do in the meantime. I also want to point out that many First Nations depend on salmon and moose in order to not starve, Honourable Speaker, and that's just the facts where I live, around the province as well. It's not a luxury. And so that is why it's important for this government and under a poverty reduction plan, and until we get there, to consider a cumulative effects assessment. And that's something that the University of Victoria's Environmental Law Centre asked the Minister of the Environment to do under Section 49 of the Environmental Assessment Act, where the Minister has the ability to order a strategic and economic environmental assessment of liquid natural gas development in British Columbia. That was mocked by the Energy Minister and not taken up as a serious suggestion. So I speak in support of the motion. We can learn from elsewhere, other jurisdictions, and in the meantime, let's not make things worse. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Thank the member and recognize the member from Vancouver Falls Creek.
Yes, I would also like to acknowledge the member from Creston Nelson for bringing up this important issue of poverty and low income. I certainly believe that it's an issue that all of us should be constantly aware of and should be working on. We need to do all we can to give people the opportunity to have their needs met, and more than that, to live full, flourishing lives, and all of us are in favor of that. I do recall reading a quote from Dwight Eisenhower. He said, you know, he was a very important general and a president of the United States. He said, "I have found in my life that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable." It's important that we have an active role in trying to do addressing issues as we see them, as they come up, as they need to be addressed. I can tell you my own experience is I had a certain brush with low income, or you might say poverty, in my own life. When I had just turned 19, I had an accident, acquired a disability that left me on welfare, living in social housing for a number of years. So I certainly did feel the sting of not having a lot of money. And in those days, the welfare system was set up for people with disabilities is that if you made any money, you had to give it back. And if you, had any benefits, you would actually start to lose benefits. So by making some income, even a modest amount of income, you had to give it back, and then you would start to lose benefits like access to housing, access to transportation, and things like that. And I was I worked with some other people with disabilities to try to address that, and what we were thrilled with was that actually this government started to relax that so that it was possible for people with disabilities to make up to $200 a month and not lose it. And that was a great move, and this has been moved up slowly but surely, so people with disabilities are able to make modest amounts of income before they start losing that from their income assistance. This has been a great development in my mind, for many people with disabilities. It certainly hasn't solved the problem. Many people with disabilities aren't able to take advantage of those benefits, but it is going the right direction. And I think when the members opposite identify issues, they need to bring them up, and we need to know about them, and we need to address them as we find them. And I think that sometimes what happens when you develop the overall plans, the plans become the focus themselves. I've certainly seen that in my work with the city of Vancouver, where the plans become the focus, and positive developments stop happening while the planning is in place. I think we need to do planning on a constant basis, and we need to address these problems as they come. No one wants to see, especially children, living in poverty. And I know that a lot of the effort has been to end child poverty through supporting and defending the creation of family-supporting jobs, and that is absolutely essential. Children are not in poverty by themselves. Children are in poverty because their parents are in poverty. And we need to be able to support in every way we can. That is why we are focused on creating jobs, building a strong economy. That certainly is an important element to that. The best way to lift people out of poverty is to ensure that they have all the help they can with work, with getting a job, and getting well-paying jobs. So I acknowledge the member for bringing this up. I think it's an important issue, and I think we need to be active always on this file, and I would encourage all the House to support that. Thank you.
Thank the member and recognize the member from Esquimalt Royal Roads.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker, and I'm very happy to stand this morning and support the motion that has been brought forward by my colleague from Nelson Creston. And in fact, I think that the remarks that we've heard from the opposition members here support the idea that poverty is an issue for all British Columbians, not just for those who are living in poverty, but in fact, across this country, and certainly throughout this province, we know that the impacts of poverty are of great concern. Economists are talking across this country about how inequality and this issue of the working poor is a huge drain on the economy, and is something we should all address, not just from a social perspective, by doing what is the right thing, but in fact, finding ways to ensure that families and individuals across this province have an opportunity to prosper in the future, and there are a whole number of components that go into that. Now, Honourable Speaker, we have seen over the last decade of BC Liberal government that the term the working poor has become entrenched in our culture. And what that means is poverty is not just abject poverty. I heard members from the other side this morning talking about third world poverty and abject poverty, how people were happy in their poverty in other countries, how somehow comparing that to what's happening here in British Columbia was in any way relevant. In fact, it's disturbing to think that that is the way members on the other side of the House think about poverty and how they think about the charge and responsibility they have in this province to resolve some of these issues. And so, Honourable Speaker, there are a number of things that the government itself needs to face up to. And one is that the issue of the working poor has been created under the jurisdiction of this government over the last decade. Families that we now see who are working, holding down full-time jobs, are accessing food banks, are having huge challenges with paying shelter costs, and in fact are finding themselves very marginalized. This has an impact on the entire economy of our province and certainly the country, and it is something that governments should be grappling with. Instead, we see this kind of ostrich mentality on the other side of the House here, that somehow if we deny that there's poverty, if we stack up enough statistics or compare ourselves to abject poor in third world countries, that it doesn't exist here. But that, in fact, Honourable Speaker, is not true. And in fact, the government currently, not only 10 years of having the highest level of child poverty in the country, currently the government, in their denial about addressing poverty, is making life less affordable for families every single day. We are going to see a 20% increase in hydro rates. Who will that hurt the most, Honourable Speaker? Well, I hear in my community, that's going to hurt people on fixed incomes. That is hurting the high proportion of single parents who are living in poverty and that growing crisis of single parents living in poverty. Anyone who is marginalized in any way at the current time is going to see a huge impact of these hydro costs. So the government is not only not taking action, they are in fact making life less affordable. Now, we talk about other jurisdictions, and we see great examples across this country of provinces who have taken steps to put in place a poverty reduction plan with measured goals, with measured outcomes. But there are some components that we could be doing here in this province now, even if you don't want to engage in the idea of a poverty reduction plan. There are two very clear things that this government could take immediate steps on. Number one, if you're going to have a jobs plan, you need to have a childcare plan. A childcare plan that is affordable and effective and accessible in every community here. You want people to get back to work, especially the single mothers who are living disproportionately in poverty. Have a childcare plan so that they can find effective and affordable childcare. in their communities. The other thing we could be doing is looking at the issue of shelter. This government did away with building affordable housing when they came into power in 2001. We could start building affordable rental housing tomorrow on public lands. The government is currently going to sell off public assets in order to help balance the budget. Well, you know what? We could be doing a much better job. We could use the public lands to build public housing and make sure that we can have affordable rental housing in this province. Two very clear solutions that the government could engage in right now. So when I hear the government continue to deny that there's poverty, they're jacking up the cost of living for British Columbians all across the income levels of this province without any discrimination for how it's going to hurt those living in poverty or those living on the low income end of the spectrum, that is just simply irresponsible, Honourable Speaker. They could take clear action today. You know, if you don't want to have a poverty reduction plan, if we want to continue to sort of be out of sync with where the rest of the country is going, well, that's a choice that this government will make. But I think it's irresponsible. So we could immediately take some steps today, Honourable Speaker, to put in place some real support systems for those who are living in poverty and accessible, affordable childcare spaces. We build housing. We can make sure that we actually are offering solutions rather than burying our head in the sand here in this province. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
I thank the member and recognize the member from Delta North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my constituents, I'm glad to be able to address the House today on this very important issue of reducing poverty. And it's a very important and complex problem, Mr. Speaker, that every government faces across Canada and around the world. So how do we help? We believe one of the best ways is building a strong economy that creates jobs. Honourable Speaker, all of us want our most vulnerable citizens to be cared for. In Delta, we have agencies such as Delta Assist that help people at various stages of life and facing a number of challenges. So we can't underestimate the work being done at the local level, and province-wide, our government helps British Columbians by ensuring people can take care of their basic needs every day. We encourage independence, and we help people become self-sufficient. We want to get people back to work and back on their feet, and we've made changes to income assistance policies and we try to improve the lives of the most vulnerable in our province. And that's our province, Mr. Speaker, and I heard the province of Quebec in this House invoke twice with regard to a poverty reduction plan. And I'm not quite sure the province of Quebec is the best example that we can hold up here, Mr. Speaker. It's not exactly shining. They have the highest debt to GDP ratio in the entire country, Mr. Speaker. They have the highest tax jurisdiction in Canada. And I guess, Mr. Speaker, that puts Quebec in an enviable position because as a result of that, they are the recipients of disproportionate federal transfer payments flowing into their province. So, Mr. Speaker, in a very roundabout way, but in a very real way, the province of British Columbia is helping to pay for their debt reduction program, Mr. Speaker. So it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me to use that as the example. And I can't see any other way of addressing this issue other than this side of the House raising taxes to pay for increased support, Mr. Speaker. And that results, Mr. Speaker, in suppressing economic development in this province, which turns us into a vicious circle. I don't want to be like Quebec, Mr. Speaker. I'm quite proud of the financial record that this province has. And of course, there are some people who, because of disability and other reasons, are unable to work, Mr. Speaker. And members will likely know that BC does not charge families on income assistance for MSP and pharmacare. Basic dental coverage is also available to kids whose parents are on assistance. For those receiving disability assistance, we're creating comprehensive support systems, and our total disability rates are in the middle range of all Canadian provinces, Mr. Speaker. We also support people by offering discounted bus passes, medical supplies, as well as earnings exemptions. Housing and other areas is another area we can help improve the lives of people in need, Mr. Speaker, and our goal is to build healthy and sustainable communities. Whether you rent or you're in need of housing is central to all of our lives, and our government strategy includes increasing the capacity of nonprofit societies, expanding rental assistance to give people more choices, renovating social housing in need of major repair, and building new units for people with the greatest need, Madam Speaker. Since 2001, this government has invested $3.6 billion to provide affordable housing for low-income individuals, seniors, and families. The rental assistance programs help families with the cost of private market rental housing. Working families earning up to $35,000 a year are eligible to receive rental assistance ranging from $50 up to $765 per month, Madam Speaker. And last year, more than 10,000 low-income families in British Columbia received monthly cash assistance through the rental assistance program to help pay for their rent. Time and time again, we've stressed the importance of ensuring there are jobs, and we've talked about the importance of balancing and creating a climate that encourages investment. That's something members on this side of the House have worked tirelessly to achieve. We believe that jobs are the key for lifting people out of poverty, Madam Speaker. Our BC Jobs Plan, which we have also spoken about many times, is worth speaking about again. Through the BC Jobs Plan, we're making significant investments in skills training and will ensure citizens in our province are the first to benefit from good jobs that are being created in British Columbia. Madam Speaker, there's no easy answer to finding poverty or to ending poverty, but I believe our government is on the right track to making sure we are in sound financial shape so that we'll be able to keep those most in need helped. And with that, Madam Speaker, I move we adjourn debate.
Honourable members, you've heard the question. All those in favour? Aye. Opposed? Nay. Motion is carried.